Hello everyone. In this lecture, we will discuss the independent and the dependent voltage or current sources. So first of all, let us understand what is an independent voltage or current source. An independent voltage or current source is a source whose voltage or current value remains constant with respect to time. That is, the value of the independent voltage source or the independent current source will remain constant for all values of time t. Let us understand this with the help of an example. Suppose we have a voltage source whose value is V is equal to 10 volts. Now if we plot this voltage with respect to time, then we will get a straight line parallel to the x-axis. That is, the value of this voltage will remain 10 volts for all values of time t. Similarly, if we consider an independent current source whose value is 2 amperes, then the value of this current will remain 2 ampere for all values of the time t. Now let us try to understand what is a dependent voltage or current source. A dependent voltage source, which is also called a controlled voltage source, is a voltage source which will provide a voltage supply whose magnitude will depend on either the voltage across or the current flowing through some other circuit elements. That is, we can say that a dependent voltage source is a source whose magnitude will depend on the value of the voltage or current in some other parts of the circuit. Similarly, a dependent current source is a source whose magnitude will depend on either the voltage or the current through some other parts of the circuit. Now, the independent sources can be represented by round circles. And we know that the voltage sources are represented by positive and negative polarity, whereas the current sources are represented by arrow symbol. So, if we want to represent an independent voltage source, then it can be represented by a circle having two terminals. So, this is an independent current source and this is an independent voltage source, because this is a voltage source because it has been represented by plus and minus polarity. So, voltage sources are represented by plus and minus polarity. Similarly, the current sources are represented by arrow symbol and the independent sources are represented by circle. So, this is an independent current source. Similarly, this is an independent voltage source. So, we can say that the independent voltage source is one whose voltage does not depend on either the value of the current flowing through the source or its direction, but its value is determined solely by the value of the source alone. Now we have seen that the independent sources are represented by round circles, whereas the dependent sources are represented with diamond shape, and these dependent sources are used as equivalent electrical sources for many electronic devices, and they are used in transistors and operational amplifiers. Now, if you want to represent a dependent source, then we can represent it with the help of this diamond symbol. So, this diamond symbol represents the dependent source. Now since this diamond symbol is having an arrow, so this arrow represents a current source. So this is the symbol of a dependent current source, or the dependent source is also called controlled source. So we can say that this is the symbol of controlled current source. Similarly, this is represented by diamond symbol, and since the polarity plus and minus has been indicated inside this diamond symbol, so this is the symbol of a dependent voltage source or a controlled voltage source. Now depending upon whether the dependent voltage or current source is dependent on the current or voltage in the circuit, there are 4 types of dependent sources. These are voltage dependent voltage sources, or in short we can write this as VDVS, that is voltage dependent voltage source. Similarly, the second type is the current dependent voltage source. If the voltage source is dependent on the current in the circuit, then it is known as current dependent voltage source. Similarly, if the current source is dependent on the value of the voltage in any part of the circuit, then it is a voltage dependent current source, or in short we can write this as VDCS. Similarly, if the current source is dependent on the current in any part of the circuit, then this type of current source is called current dependent current source. So we have 4 types of current source. There are 2 types of dependent voltage source. One is voltage dependent voltage source and the other one is the current dependent voltage source. Similarly, there are 2 types of dependent current source, that is voltage dependent current source and the current dependent current source. Now in the next lecture, we will be discussing the dependent voltage or current source with the help of some circuit diagrams. Hope the topic independent voltage and current source and dependent voltage and current source is clear to all of you.